from CrossFit Markham or from judging comps at CrossFit Markham. In real life, I'm the strategic partner manager for news and entertainment at Facebook and Instagram. I work with news organizations, both national and local, journalists, broadcasters, musicians, and content creators to make sure they're getting the max benefits out of the platforms. Before that, I was at Chorus Entertainment for 5 years, working with journalists alongside Global News. And I have a formal background in media studies as an education. So today I wanted to chat about digital media literacy and how important it is in this day and age to get your news from reputable sources. With so much news flying around about COVID-19, it's important to be properly informed so that we can continue to do our part and stay safe. It's also really helpful for our mental and literal physical health to be able to discern with what is real and what is sensationalism or fake. Being digitally literate can also protect you from things like fraud, phishing, hacking, and identity theft. What I'm going to walk through is 3 main topics focused on what makes a trusted news source, how to identify correct health and science information, and how we broadcast news as participants on social media. I'm gonna take you through these 3 things, and after each end, I'm gonna stop and ask for questions. Hopefully, that won't take too long, and at the end of this, I'll have some time at the end for other questions. I'll even take questions about, how Facebook works, how targeting works, how to maintain max privacy on the platform. So anything like that you have, save that to the end, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of it right now. So the first thing I want to talk about is identifying news sources. Online news is one of the hardest things to verify. Sometimes early reports that turn out not to be true can still circulate on the internet, and people may spread false reports for commercial or malicious reasons, even just for fun. So with that being said, I've got 3 tips to help make you a savvy reader and sharer of online news. The first tip always is check out the original source. So don't assume that a report is true just because lots of other people have shared it. It's high in search results or it's trending on a social network. Hoaxers can manipulate these measures to spread their versions of the story. Instead, the best thing that you can do is if you see something, open up a new tab to go what we like to call upstream to find the original source. Did the story or content really come from the source listed? An example of this is last night, my wife got an email from her naturopath with a link to Bill Gates's open letter to the world. It was this beautiful thing of 13, I think, points that he wanted to make about, what we're going through as a society right now. Spoiler alert, a simple Google search proved that Bill Gates did not, in fact, write that. So if you guys are seeing that getting sent around social media, like it's one thing to spread false news, to spread fear and misinformation, but you also kind of need to be aware of these types of things where people are trying to share good stuff. They'll attribute it to a celebrity who they assume will never ever have to read that in their life, but it adds more credibility to the thing that they're trying to get out into the world. So there's little things like that that you can do to double check what you're seeing and to determine whether or not what's actually being presented on social media is real. The next thing that I want to talk about is watch for the URLs and pay attention to news aggregators. Instead of just following a link that you see on social media that might take you to a fake website, do a search for the website in a separate tab just to double check. I saw one today that was about how it was a news story about how a Canadian doctor jerry-rigged a ventilator to support 9 patients. Once you clicked on that link, it took you to a news aggregator called Interesting Engineering that didn't have any sources or couldn't name the doctor. So really pay attention to the URLs. In Facebook specifically, we've been really, really transparent at showing you where you're going to go before you go off platform. And the best way to look about that is if you do get a link to something, it will see underneath CTV News or CP24, or in this case, Interesting Engineering. A simple Google search will show you what you're looking at. And there's a couple tips and tricks within that as to how to figure out whether what you're looking at is a real news website or whether it's a news aggregator. So the first indicator of a real news website is that it has a masthead, is that the Stories typically have the writer's byline at the top of the page, so you know who wrote this story. And then if you go to the About Us section, it should have an editorial board. So it should have some kind of legitimacy to what they're reporting. So if you look at CTV News, Global News, City TV News, CP24, they all have those things in common. If you're going to a different website, I know like a popular one is, I forgive my language, but like I fucking love science. There's actually a web page that's about that, but they are a news aggregator where they sort through scholarly articles, and they don't actually have any bylines or editorial board or anything like that. So it's something to just be aware of, and I can go into that a little bit later when we're talking about the medical section. But the biggest thing that you guys can take out of this is that just be very cautious as to where posts are trying to send you to. The next one is, does the source for the news have a good track record of accuracy? So no news source is unbiased, but some will be more reliable than others. Here are some markers of a reliable news organization. The first one is accuracy. If they can't get the little things right, like errors in people's names, not getting the right statistics, etc., it's hard to trust them with like the bigger picture things. Do they have a willingness or acknowledge to correct gaps and mistakes? So do they admit when they don't have all the information at this point in time? When they do make mistakes, do they issue a correction? You'll often find with fake news sources is that they don't care about issuing corrections because the content's already out there, so who cares? True verified news sources will 9 times out of 10, if they get a story wrong, issue a correction immediately. The other piece I wanted to talk about was the separation between opinion and news content. So most news outlets have an editorial slant. There's no going around that. You know, the Sun tends to be a little bit more right wing. The Star tends to be a little more left of center. All news organizations are going to have that slant no matter what. But that shouldn't affect the news that they cover. For instance, if the editorial generally supports one political viewpoint, does the news still cover stories that would offer a contrary perspective? And for most of our national newspapers, national news sources, broadcast news, that is the case. A lot of other news sources where you can pull information from are presenting one point of view, but not really presenting the other one. Those are the ones you have to be a little bit wary of when you're seeking out information. And then the final piece is identification of sources. While it's entirely legitimate news sources do sometimes use anonymous sources. Most of the time, sources should be clearly identified to you. So lots of news stories, you're not going to hear, you know, we're hearing from an anonymous source that X, Y, and Z is happening. They're going to say someone from within the Ministry of Health is saying X, Y, and Z. That's the best indicator as to which they're trying to be as accurate in their reporting as possible. So a lot of fake news organizations are fast and loose with those details as well. At this point, I'm going to pause really quick to see if there are any questions. If not, Steve, just give me the thumbs up and we'll keep going. Awesome. Okay. So double checking science and health news. No joke about it, we're currently living through a pandemic. Naturally, there's been a spike in science and health news, and misinformation is rampant, even being shared by the President of the United States. So he's putting out stuff that like these concoctions can help prevent coronavirus, has actually ended up with people being killed as a result of that. So you need to be really, really diligent in the information that you're getting from health professionals and science professionals as this outbreak continues throughout the day or throughout this period of time that we're currently living in. Here are 3 tips to make sure the health information you're looking at is accurate. You can always check the credentials of the author or the publisher references. Most scientists and doctors are easily Googleable by their name. Don't take a website's About Us page at face value because it's only going to show what the site's creator wants you to know. Most science and health news reference studies done by various universities or medical organizations are also easily Googleable. So if you run into a situation where you're hearing that, you know, the team at UCLA has isolated the virus, From a news source, you can actually go into Google and say UCLA coronavirus COVID-19 isolation, and that same news source should show up somewhere else. Look for purpose and bias. This goes back to that old trope of morning news where every other day you'd find out that like coffee or wine or sugar is good or bad for you. A lot of those studies oftentimes are funded by organizations meant to push their own biases for the public. You can think about that classic example of Canada's previous food guide, which was heavily influenced by the sugar industry. And so the changes that they've made in Canada's food guide recently have affected that. They've removed a little bit of that bias where, the dairy farmers don't have a huge amount of say in it, or, they're keeping you away from baked goods or wheat or that kind of stuff. Those are conscious changes that government organizations have had to make to get around some of the biases that exist within research in the medical community. And then the third piece for medical results is to go beyond the top results. Google and Bing as a search engine, they prioritize keywords, optimization over facts and accuracy. So don't assume when you Google something that the top result is the most relevant and pertinent information. Not to get too controversial here, but if you search in Google, should I vaccinate my kids? 4 of the top 5 search results take you to anti-vaccination pages. So, you can't look at the search engines as to what they're doing is searching for relevancy and accuracy. What they're actually searching for in that instance is how many keywords, how many times was this mentioned, how close to this search result are we sending up pages here. Oftentimes the most pertinent medical information will be if you do a little bit of digging onto like even to page 1 or 2 or 3 at that point of the search results. Any questions on that end? Cool. Okay. So the third piece here is talking about how we all have a role to play. What I like to call this section the Thanksgiving dinner with your strange uncle part of the conversation, as it does get a little bit awkward. But what can we do to stop misinformation in its tracks as, everyday people working, playing, checking out social media? I believe I mentioned this before, but people trust the people closest to them when they share news articles. And so it's up to our part to make sure that what we are sharing is as accurate as possible, or having the tools to be able to go to someone and say, hey, just so you know, this article is not entirely true. For that purpose, there's a couple tips here. The first one being to recognize your own biases. This one is really hard because it forces you to think about why you're sharing the article. So a good rule of thumb is to think before you share, obviously, but one of the ways that you can use as a filter in your own head as you're trying to determine whether or not you should share this with your circle of people is, does this article represent me as a person, and is this something that I back? So are you sharing this information for the purpose of trying to spin a story a certain way? Humans are natural storytellers, and they're naturally drawn to things that help them fill in the pieces of the puzzle. The best way, this is a really bad example, but the best way to think about this is like a couple months ago on the Spit and Chicklets podcast, Austin Matthews mentioned that Morgan Riley of the Toronto Maple Leafs spends too much time with his new girlfriend, and a bunch of people put a couple points together that said that his girlfriend is actually Tessa Virtue. That's been going on for months now, and people have been trying so hard to try and put those pieces together of that story. They actually recently came out as a couple days ago, actually, on one of the Arkells live streams, and people were overjoyed. But for those 4 months in between hearing a rumor and then having that thing confirmed, everybody on social media was trying to be an internet sleuth to try to make it a thing or to debunk it or to not make it. So, speaking to that point of how we're natural storytellers, we're naturally drawn to things, to news pieces, to little bits of information that may help us fill in the blanks a little bit more. That's really how a lot of conspiracy theories come to play as well. And it's natural human nature to do that. what I would ask in this case is that we are conscious and learning about our own biases and how these little things can potentially snowball into bigger issues if we don't, keep ourselves in check. Um, Debunking with details. So it's our role to not only communicate effectively, but to be able to stop misinfo in its tracks. What you can do if someone you know is sharing misinformation is, one, don't make it personal. Try to avoid engaging with the parts that are strongly emotional and focus on the facts of the situation. Two, replace the bad facts with good facts. So provide enough accurate facts to replace the inaccurate stories in people's minds. This goes really far in, having those conversations about misinformation around a certain topic. I can't really think of one off the top of my head right now, but it's basically like if someone's got a certain view of stuff or they've heard from several news sources that this is a thing, they're going to start to believe that, and it's up to us to go, actually, here's how to debunk that. So that leads into my third point about making it a learning opportunity. Show them how you fact checked those claims. It gives you more credibility, and it gives them a tool for fact checking in the future. I like to think of this as whenever my mom shares something on social media about how the Ontario government is now implementing a fine if you're caught looking at your phone at a stoplight. She's so quick to share that stuff, but it turns out to be chain emails. You just have to go back to them and go, hey, look, here's the actual news information article. Here's the things that say that this isn't true. Could you take this post down? And 9 times out of 10, she'll go, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that. I was just, a friend shared it to me. So I was just passing it on for everybody. There's times like that where you can go and combat misinformation directly just by being, rational. And then to that point on the final piece there is you can't care about winning an argument online. Like, flame wars are going to happen no matter what you do. When you're battling misinformation, it's less about trying to prove you're right over the other person and more about making sure that the correct information is also out there as well. So people who hold an opinion strongly aren't likely to change their minds. What matters is that the other people in your network come away with the right information. So as much as possible, try to make this a non-confrontational thing and just present and the as best as you can the accurate side of things for that. Talking about some tips for news gathering. Try to get your info straight from the source wherever possible. So York Public Health, the City of Markham, or the City of Vaughan, hospital communications, government sources, etc. They're the most reliable news sources at this time. A lot of our news broadcasters and news publications in Canada right now are often just repeating and trying to make sense of that information that's released from those organizations. But in order to stay as up to date and as best informed as possible, our public health institutions, the hospital itself, the city communications, the governmental communications, all the way up to the federal government. Those are the best sources of information that you can look for concrete information at this time. And if you wanted to narrow your news gathering sources to that stuff, you'd be as informed as the journalists who are writing about it currently. Some other things that I wanted to shout out about, I know that I work for Facebook and Instagram, but Twitter is an incredible incredible platform for just getting a straight up fire hose of information. Some Twitter accounts of government officials and health journalists that I recommend are Andre Picard from the Globe and Mail. He's the country's top health and science journalist and has been doing an incredible job of curating accurate stories around Canada's response to COVID. And then Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's chief public health officer. You may have seen her on a couple commercials being shown on TV last night, but she's a fantastic follow as well. She's giving us broad information and informing us of any changes on a national level. To that point, I would say for Twitter, to stay off of the Explore tab as much as possible. So if you're looking at the trending topics and you go down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of stuff in there that's incredibly not true. And as I mentioned in an earlier note about how to decipher a news org, hoaxers can use those tools to their benefit. to make things trend that maybe aren't really the case, or take their point of view and put it across as a way that's meant to be, news reporting, but it is definitely not. So just be careful of that, and keep a really tight circle as to, the news sources that you do get things from. So I would also, recommend that you subscribe to local journalism in times like these. Local journalism is as important as national news at this point, and allows you to keep an ear on the ground in our communities. There's like the York Region news that's run by Torstar, I believe, is one of the best reporting across all of York Region. So it includes Vaughan, it includes Bradford, it includes Markham, it includes everything, and it tells you what's happening in your community at that moment. It's incredibly important to pay attention to those local journalists as well, and to subscribe to them, because they can't do this public service without money, and in times like these, ad revenues are kind of dwindling. So the best thing you can do to support local journalism in your community is to subscribe to it. I'm going to pause there. The next thing I'm going to talk about is social media for fun, so some little bit of uplifting content there. But are there any questions from the chat at this point?
There is one there in the chat, Jay.
Yeah. Can you list some links of trustworthy websites we could check, especially for local news in Ontario and York Region? Yes, I can. I can send some links through after this about where you can get pertinent information from. As I mentioned, the York Region, I forget what it's called. It's like York Region News is one of the best ones. The Markham Economist and Sun doesn't actually have any kind of social presence or website that I can find, but those are the best places to look for news in your community right now.
So not Six Buzz?
Sorry, what's that?
So not Six Buzz that I follow? They love it. Yeah.
You know what?
A lot of different variety of news that come out, COVID related and everything else, everything under the sun.
Six Buzz is super interesting because they're actually an active partner of mine, so we work with them really closely, and we've actually had to issue a bunch of like emails, strongly worded emails to them, because they've been sharing misinfo and they're not aware of it either. Six Buzz is not a there's a bunch of local news sites that exist. So Six Buzz, BlogTO, Narcity, all those things, those are at best news aggregators. So they don't have a staff on hand to write stuff. They tend to rely on third-party information to get their stuff across. Six Buzz is doing a much better job of taking a more serious approach to this. Like early on in as this crisis broke out across China and those types of places, it was joking around that you couldn't go to Brampton, you couldn't go to Markham because everybody's coming from Wuhan coming into these places. And it was like, dude, like, you're a news organization. There's like millions of people in the GTA that rely on you to get their news, and you're telling them to stay away from communities in our own community. So Six Buzz is good for those sensational headlines, but what I would say is, if you are getting your information from Six Buzz, do a little bit of research to find the article that they're referencing. So they often look at CP24, they look at 680 News, they look at Global News, and to that point as well, there are actual journalists that hop into the comments of the Six Buzz post, like Brandon Gonez, a bunch of other journalists who work for these organizations that do try to work and provide a little more context to the stories that stuff like Six Buzz puts forward.
So how does Six Buzz, like, this is just something doing for pastime, or is they're actually finding ways to generate revenue using this by being a third-party presenter of news? How does that work?
So they're currently not generating revenue. They are using a lot of, like, not directly revenue within the Facebook and Instagram environment. They're doing a lot of stuff like they're using their platform to promote local artists. So they're getting buy-in for local artists to get like 10% of their record deals or 10% of their streaming deals if they get that. And they're really using that platform as a jumping off point from there. I'm really good friends with Enrique, who runs that arm of the business right now. And what that is essentially just like finding local artists, finding local rappers, getting them to deals, giving them a little bit of money and funds to make a rap video, and then getting a licensing deal to use that content on their platform. They're doing a lot of stuff in terms of merch. They're doing a lot of stuff in terms of branded content giveaways. So they're using their platform to drive a lot of off-platform outcomes, and they're not making a significant ton of like. They're never going to make traffic revenue. They don't really have a website per se, so they can't really make ad revenue off of their owned and operated website. What they can do is get these little like sweet little branded content deals on the side to help their revenue coming forward. But they're also Six Buzz is also heavily invested in from the Ryerson DMZ. So a lot of their money is coming from venture capitalist funding right now.
Interesting. What kind of responsibility does Facebook have? Like when you guys see like there's a lot of bullshit content out there, when are you guys flagged for you guys to actually step in? Just when someone says like report this, or you guys like it doesn't really matter like how much bullshit's put out there, or like when do you guys decide when it's time for you to govern and step in and say, guys, stop posting this? Does it have to be like after so many followers, or it could be anybody, or?
It could be anybody, really. Anybody is doing their civic duty by reporting misinformation or false or misleading news. If you use the tools within Facebook, that is taken really seriously, and there's actually a person who goes in and determines whether or not that thing was false. I had a situation where I had to report a friend of mine because they kept posting some really racist, awful stuff about that Wuhan noodle place in Markham. They're like, "Oh, I'm never eating here in a million years," and it's like, come on, man, like come on. And they're telling everybody to stay away from Markham and stay away from, I think it was when this first broke out in like January or February, they were saying like, oh, stay away from the TNT supermarket at Warden and Steeles, or oh, don't go anywhere near this place in Scarborough because 6 ambulances had to come and take someone away who said they were having coughing fits. And it's like, no, none of this stuff ever happened. I actually reported that through the tool right away, and that post was taken down immediately. From their end, they got a notification that they're posting false or misleading content, and then they'll hopefully learn their lesson from there. To give you a bit of background as to how Facebook deals with this, so I mean, full transparency, like 4 years ago, we were in a shit place. Misinformation was rampant on the platforms. Third-party news aggregators could just run rampant with completely biased articles about political stuff, about local stuff, about racist stuff, like whatever. We've taken a really hard phased approach to privacy and to locking down misinformation on the platform. So for every news article you see on the site, that is verified by a third-party source. We actually have something that I work with directly in my department, which is the news page index. So every single news publisher in Canada has to apply to be eligible to post news on our platform. And there's a stringent set of guidelines for that as well. And it ties into some of this digital literacy stuff that we were talking about. So do they have bylines? Do they have reporter names on each piece that they put out? Do they have a clearly established break between opinion-based pieces and news reporting? And do they have a verified domain that they can send people to? Every single news publisher in Canada has that. So every single CTV news page, every single global news page, every single CP24 page, every single CBC page that you can get your news from has been verified in that system. And the same goes for the US as well. So CNN, NBC, ABC, Fox News, all those news stations have gone through the same process.
Now that like everyone's like financially unstable, especially businesses, have you guys noticed a huge drop in people paying for advertising so people can get more views right now? Or
nothing has been confirmed as of yet about that. What we can say is that people have adopted new ways of using the platform. A lot of small, medium businesses are very adaptable. They've found ways to, maybe use less of the ads platform, but use more of the organic side of things. And the good response that we're seeing as well is that on the other side of that, their fans, their followers, their customers are really leaning into wanting to support these small and medium businesses. So there's actually, I can't for sure say if there's been a revenue implication, but there's definitely been a reverse uptick in the amount of organic traction that these businesses have had, and that's really helped out in the long run as they probably scale back their advertising efforts.
Cool.
Do we get to the fun stuff now?
I thought we were already having fun.
All right. So, I've gone through this whole thing, and I've talked to you about, how to be very careful and diligent about using social media in this time. But like, one of the things that like I wanted to get across to you is that like, this should be a fun tool. This shouldn't be a second job to fact check every single piece of news you see. What I hope for you guys to get out of this is just to have a little bit more concern over what you are sharing, and to make sure that what you or your friends and family are sharing to you as well is as accurate as can be in these times. But the reality of the situation is that social media should be fun. It shouldn't be a second job for you to have to fact check some stuff. But given that everyone's basically in the same situation at this point, artists, public figures, content creators, and the likes are turning to social media to hopefully provide a bright spot into someone's day. I just want to shout out the Arkells are going live every day at 1 p.m. to teach fans how to play their songs. There's been so many concerts. I was just telling Steve before this live chat had started that like my day is I basically come up here and I sit in my office at 8 p.m. or at 8 a.m. and until 4:45 p.m. I'm talking to partners about how they can go live to entertain the people that typically rely on them for other things. So musicians, content creators, and the likes, they're all asking how can we maximize what we're doing on this platform. So you can I believe there's a Twitter account which I can send where he's actually been compiling every single live at home performance that musicians are putting on each day, and you can actually go and tune into them at the times in which they're actually on. And there's been a huge uptick in that of just people watching live artist content right now. You have Coldplay, you have Garth Brooks. I saw Darius Rucker on the other day. We actually did a thing with the National Arts Center last Thursday where we had Jim Cuddy of Blue Rodeo play a set for an hour. It was incredible. It was really, really heartwarming. But those options are available to you as well. And social media shouldn't be a thing that gives you anxiety. It should help relieve anxiety when you're looking for an escape from the reality of our situation right now. Some other things you can do, so you can learn a new skill. People are going live with cooking classes. So Alton Brown has a live cooking class every single day. I've seen people take up woodworking, as there's been some creators that have come across that are just like, hey, I'm going to go live and show you how to create this bowl that out of this hunk of wood that I made. I believe there was someone in the community around here who was doing a drawing class every single day at 11 a.m. So teaching kids how to draw a monster or how to use art for good. And then language seminars as well. So there's people who have been offered to Spanish speaking classes, French speaking classes, along the likes, all in a live environment. The other thing is to keep up your daily routine. So, I just wanted to give an incredible shout out to the Cristinis and crew for keeping us all fit, adding a little bit of normalcy to our day in these times. Same goes if you're religious. Religious orgs are streaming sermons and services over Facebook Live on Sundays as well. So just because you are confined to your home doesn't mean that you have to keep away from things that make you happy. The priest who actually married my wife and I was moved to Vancouver to continue his fellowship, and he's been streaming his services over Facebook Live every Saturday. I think some of us are members of the Olive Branch here in Markham. They've also been doing like a 45-minute sermon every single day. So don't think of this as a disruption to your daily life. Think of it as a way to connect with people. And the last thing I'd say is, connect over video chat to loved ones. Self-serving shout out to Facebook Messenger right now. You can connect with anybody via vid chat over Facebook Messenger if you haven't already. You can watch videos together on Facebook or connect and have a movie night on Netflix or Disney Plus. So don't think of this as, I always have this this joke in my head from a couple years ago where, 2009, it was all like, oh, cool, like you can follow your favorite celebrities and talk to them. And in 2019, in 2020 especially, the sentiment has been like, stare into the nightmare rectangle and watch society collapse in real time. But it doesn't have to be that way. Um, it should be something that brings us all closer together in times like these. And you know, I've seen a lot of really positive things from partners and from just family members and stuff who've really taken the time to reconnect over social media since we've all been so socially distant. Um, that'll do it for, my prepared statements. Uh, if anybody has any other questions about absolutely anything, I'm all ears, about, Facebook and how it works, about how targeting works, about how to stay super as privacy locked down as possible on the platform. Anything you guys want to throw at me, I'm all ears at this point.
Since this happened, I noticed that now we can talk to multiple people at once on Facebook Messenger
Yep.
through like FaceTime. Like, I'm assuming that's something that just came up right now, or something you guys just now, or is that something you guys were able to do previously?
You've always been able to have video chats with multiple people. I think what we've done recently is we've increased the limit of video chats on Instagram and Instagram Messenger specifically to 6 people at a time. So you can actually have video chats with 6 people at a time on Instagram. But I think that's the only increase that we've had. We've always been able to have video chat capabilities from a group's environment or from a one-to-one with Messenger situation. Some of the things that we are working on is finding ways to surface content better for people in these times, and finding better ways to surface content specifically from friends and family members.
Are you guys looking to be more comparable or do the same things that Zoom's doing right now? Because I know Zoom's blowing up and everything we're doing is on Zoom right now. And noticed, like I don't know if you guys are looking at the same functions because you guys are not really that far or that different from what they're doing, right? So
Yeah.
is that something that you guys are thinking about, like where you guys can record your own chats, or it's almost the same way to get connected, but is it something that you've heard of or you're thinking about, or?
So we actually used to have a similar product called Live With. That was where you can just go live with multiple people. But that's been deprecated as of January 2020. What I can say is that Facebook and Zoom work incredibly close together, and we're working on getting better integration with those two systems. So being able to open a Zoom meeting, have people call into it, and then have that meeting stream directly to Facebook Live. We're working on solutions to bring those two products closer together, essentially. So it's not like a siloed approach for everything where, people are going into Zoom. Like we use Zoom meetings here when we have anybody in a meeting that's over 100 people. So we automatically switch over to Zoom when we have that capability, because, we do have an enterprise account with them. But, we have our internal stuff. It's an app called Blue Jeans, which allows video conferencing as well. It's just Zoom is so much easier because it's like one click and you're in. Blue Jeans, you have to enter a specific code, and it's like old conference calling basically.
I know Facebook Portal, is that like going to be something that could be more? I mean, I think that you have to have like a specific attachment to your TV. Is that like a plan of expanding that to like an app-based thing or anything like that?
Nope. So if anybody hasn't seen it, I actually have one right here. I use it for video chats. There's 2 options currently. There's this one, there's a smaller one, and there's one that attaches to your TV. And it's basically a camera interface that tracks where you go across an entire room. I got this one for work purposes, so it's actually loaded into our internal workplace thing. So if I have any internal calls that are happening right now, I call them on this thing and it's all video chat. It's incredible. It's probably one of the coolest things that I've been able to play with since I've been working at Facebook, but it's such a great tool for video conferencing. We're looking forward to seeing how we can integrate Zoom into this next, which this would be a great thing for you guys running those online workouts, because what you can do is instead of setting up a laptop, you can set up this and you have, I believe it's 100 and like over 180 degrees of view. So you can actually see the whole room. You can see them working out. The camera tracks your movements as you go. So if someone's doing like burpees, like it'll go up and down, up and down. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It's really, really cool. The one thing I would say is that it's heavily gated to Facebook products right now, but it is an Android supported device, and we are working on ways of integrating stuff like Zoom into it better so that you could call into a Zoom call from your portal and be able to have that camera tracking movement and the increased microphone. But it's an incredibly useful device if you do have a ton of family members who are on Facebook and you want to just call them in a snap. I'm going to turn the mic off right now just in case it decides to call my mother, but you could do things like, hey, call Debbie, and it will connect you right to your family members.
That sounds really cool.
There's also like all kinds of games and stuff you can play on it as well. If you're a grandparent and you're not around, your grandkids as much, there's actually an app on it called Storytime where you can read a story to your grandkids or your children or whatever have you, and it will fill in the blank with an AR screen. So if you're reading something about the three little pigs and the big bad wolf, every time you're reading the story, you're within the view of the camera. It's putting an AR overlay over top of you to make you look like the wolf or to make you look like one of the little pigs. Like there's a really cool feature in there that you guys can use just to connect better with your kids as well.
You said that Facebook links on to Disney Plus, so you could watch, like my parents could watch essentially the movies with my kids. Is that what you're kind of saying? Like they can see something?
It doesn't connect to Disney Plus, but the same way that I'm not sure if you've seen it recently, but there's been a hack that you can watch Netflix together. You can do the same thing with Disney Plus. It's just like get on a video chat with everybody at once, and then turn that program on at the same, and turn that movie on at the same time, so you're all watching it at the same time.
Okay, so it'd be streaming through your phone. You screen share it onto your TV, I'm assuming.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. I guess if I YouTube that, I guess I can find something like that, exactly how to do it, right?
Yeah.
Cool. That'd be good because my parents can't see my kids, so.
Yeah, exactly. So it's cool to bring that little piece together in times like these as well.
Absolutely. As far as keywords right now, because things have changed so much and people are at home and whatnot, are there certain keywords that have changed that for people posting or paying for ads and whatnot that are like highly suggested that people might not be thinking about that have changed recently?
No, and to be totally transparent, we do have things in place to prevent people from taking advantage of situations such as that. And that's just that goes along the lines of where we limited some specific detailed targeting around sensitive issues, sensitive ethnic groups, sensitive all kinds of stuff. The fact that COVID-19 content is flying on the platform right now, like we've had an increase in referral traffic to all of our news partner sites. We've had a massive spike in video engagement, but there's nothing to do to capitalize on something like this right now, if that makes sense. It's basically we're treating it as you're a business, you're selling a product to somebody. COVID-19 shouldn't be a targeting option to somebody. So you shouldn't be able to target someone who's terrified of COVID-19, or you shouldn't be a mask salesperson who's targeting people for COVID-19. What I can say is that, for something like you guys, if you're looking for ways of increasing your advertising efforts, you could focus on, things like work from home, staying home, people looking for fitness classes. So maybe get a little more generic with your fitness targeting. Those types of things tend to work best for the ads platform, but we tend to stay away from like, you definitely need to jump on this specific targeting option right now because people are going apeshit over COVID-19 content. Any other questions for anybody else at this point in time? Cool. That's it from my end. One of the things that I just want you guys to keep in mind is that, you know, be diligent with what you're looking at on social media. If you are finding that you're just completely overwhelmed and inundated and it's increasing your anxiety around, you know, the current pandemic situation that we're in right now, I would consider, you know, taking a look at, you know, what we're doing with that stream of information and how we could potentially alleviate some of that stresses that you're feeling by, you know, following less news sources, or you know, connecting better with friends and family members, or finding a new interest that you didn't know you had before that you can funnel those energies into. Social media is not supposed to be this thing that you know, tells you how bad the world is. It's supposed to bring us all closer together. And you know, in times like these, like if you do find yourself feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like by all means take a break. You know, you can't be stuck to your phone 24/7. You know, sounds pretty obvious in this time, but like take a walk without your phone. um, Make sure you have phones downtime with your family members. Just use it as an information source, but don't use it as a constant fire hose as to what's happening in the world, because you're going to overwhelm yourself way too fast. And it's going to ramp up that anxiety for you. So if you are finding that you are having a hard time navigating the like fire hose of content coming at us lately, it's totally fine to take a step back, or to reevaluate how many news organizations you're following, or to, as I said, like for something like Twitter, to stay away from the explore page, because the minute you go into there, it's just several rabbit holes that you don't necessarily need to go down. And then just to say one last thing, we do own WhatsApp as a product overall. Um, I would I would issue a word of caution that, you know, for something like Facebook or Instagram, there's algorithms in place that surface content for you, and it's a lot easier for um, you know, the platforms to have checks and balances in terms of misinformation, false content, misleading content, that kind of stuff from getting out to the general public. WhatsApp, due to the nature of its encryption, there's no way for, you know, platforms to look at what's happening on that platform and determine what's misinformation. So that platform, if you are getting advice from family members or from other people in the group's chat, go back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation of do a little bit of fact checking, find out for yourself if it's good. Because what we've been finding is there's been a proliferation of misleading at-home fixes for coronavirus content, especially coming from older people, people who, you know, don't necessarily have the same digital literacy that some other people have, and you know, just take everything on that platform with a grain of salt. And the same thing applies for Pinterest as well. There's a lot of misinformation on that content that's dressed up to make all look all sparkly and nice, but you know, do your due diligence. If someone does have references, check their references and make sure that that's good content before going and sharing it to other people. Chris, Steve, thanks so much for the time. I hope you guys found this useful. And I will see you guys in all those homework kits.
Thanks a lot. That was awesome today. We really appreciate it.
Cool.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
See you guys.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Bye, guys.
Jason.